Hi, hello everyone. It's good to see you all again. So today I wanted to discuss a bit about endgames because very soon the course I did for the Remote Chess Academy about practical endgames is going to be out. And I wanted to illustrate why, in my opinion, it's very good to know some practical endgames and basically to know what you do in the end games, and sometimes knowing your end games could be even beneficial for you when planning your opening play and your middle game play. So in order to illustrate what it really I'm talking about, I wanted to show here a game that I've played actually quite a while ago, about 7 years ago, against what I would call a typical club player, maybe about 2000 rating, maybe slightly more, maybe 2100. And I chose to show this game from the beginning just in order for you to see how did I knew what to do after the opening very precisely, because I knew what kind of end game I want to get. So I was playing white in this game. I played e4, he played e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. We have the Spanish or the Ruy Lopez here. He played a6, and in those times I liked in this position to take on c6. This was my pet line. D takes c6. This is a theoretical line, short castles. In this position, black actually has many options, so bishop d6, f6, bishop g4, many good options, but he chose to play f6, which is a very respectable line, protecting the pawn on e5. I've played d4, pawn takes, knight takes, and this is move number 7. But already from this point I knew what exactly I want to do in this game, because we can see that in this position white has a pawn majority on the center and on the king side of the board, so 4 pawns versus 3 pawns of blacks, whilst on the other side of the board, because of the weakened double pawns, we can say that black does not have the same type of advantage that white has on the other side, because his pawns are doubled. So this makes him much more unlikely to create a passed pawn on this side of the board. So what I am trying to get from this position is actually an endgame, and the best thing I can get is a pawn endgame, because in the pawn endgame I think white would be able to execute his extra pawn on the king side very effectively, whilst black couldn't do anything. Now the reason that I knew I want to get an end game is because when the board is full of pieces, then of course anything can happen. Black can create some attack, there could be some complications, some dynamics, but in the end game with no pieces on the board, for sure I could have I can use my extra pawn on the king side better. So he played c5, and now I want you to take a look how from this position it was very easy for me to know what to do in the next moves, just because I knew what kind of end game I want to get. So I played here the move knight e2. So if white wants to get an end game, we know that in general exchanging pieces is something that white doesn't mind to do all that much. Black exchanged the queens and played bishop to d7, perhaps preparing long castles, because making the move short castle in this position is a bit difficult for black, as he needs to make many moves with his pieces. I developed the knight to c3, and he played here the move bishop to d6. Now this might look like a very natural developing move, but it's actually a mistake in my opinion, because as we know, white is very happy exchanging pieces, especially bishops at this point in the game, because black possesses the two bishops advantage, which compensate him for having those double pawns on the queenside. So it was very easy for me to make my next move here. What does white need to do here? Bishop to f4, because he wants to exchange pieces. So I am threatening to take his bishop on d6. This is why he took on f4 and played the move knight to e7, trying to cover the square on d5. Once again, a very natural developing move. But once he played the knight to e7, I seized another opportunity to exchange one more pair of pieces with knight to d5. Because now I'm threatening to take the pawn on c7, so black was kind of obliged to take on c5. I want you to take notice that it would be a mistake to take with the pawn here on d5, because then I would lose my pawn majority on the king side. Now we have 4 against 4, and I could not progress here like I wanted to do before. So I took with the rook, threatening the pawn on c5. He played b6. Rook ad1 was played, bishop to c6, rook d2. The pawn on e4 cannot be taken here because I simply play my rook to e1, and I will eventually pick up this bishop. So he played king to e7, trying to connect his rooks. And once again, how should white proceed here, knowing that exchanging pieces is good for him? You can try to stop the video and think about it. So the move here is knight to d5, because the bishop has to take the knight. This knight is too strong, creating pressure against the pawn on c7. He has to take the knight. I take with the rook. Now I'm threatening to penetrate to the 7th rank and to eat many of black's pawns. So black is once again almost forced to play rook to d8 to cover the d file. And now, as we know, white get exactly what he wants. I took on d8, took the other rook, and very quickly we reached the pawn endgame. This is only move number 20, but many pieces got traded. And once again, many people would assume that this is just a draw. You know, each side has equal number of pawns. The black king is even slightly closer to the center of the board, but this is not true. We will see later on that black's double pawns on the queen side will not allow him to create any play on the queen side properly. So what should be white's plan here in general is to push his pawns on the king side and eventually creating a pass pawn, which would be inevitable at some point because white have the pawn break e5. So let's start. So pawn to f4 was played. Black played his king to e7. I brought my king up closer to the center. It did the same. Now I think white played an important move. Once again, you might want to stop the video, try to think about it for a while. So I've decided here to play the move pawn to c4. Why is this an important move? Because this pawn on c4 practically stops both of the black pawns on the c file. And this means that even if black plays the move b5 here, which he did play, I simply play the move b3. And now black can never actually do anything on the queen side because he has no breaks, he has no opportunity to create a pass pawn, which is not the case for white here. So black is a bit stuck in this position. So he played the move c6. I brought my king up slightly closer to the center, king f3, a5. Now black doesn't really threatening anything because the move a4 in itself does not threaten anything, but I decided not to allow this pawn to advance too much further, so I played a4 and he played b4. Now this is a very good example and illustration of the point I'm trying to make about the pawn structure here. White has 3 pawns, black has 4 pawns, but this doesn't matter the pawns on the c6 and the c5 file cannot move further, so they're practically, we can count them as one pawn. And now white proceeds with his plan on the king side. So g4, we want to push our pawns forward in order to have better chances of creating a passed pawn. Black cannot do too much, I believe, here. He played g6. And now, how would you play it here as white? What would you do? Try to, once again, stop and think about it. So, I think white has perhaps more than one way to win this position, but I played the move f5 check, which I believe is good enough to win. Now, if black takes this pawn, I think white can win in two ways. The simplest being taking with the pawn from the g file. And the point is that even if black plays the move king to e5, white plays king to e3. And in this position, the black king is in a zugzwang position. If the king ever moves to d6, white will immediately seize the central square on f4, and white will inevitably push his e-pawn eventually. And this is an important note, by the way. If black is trying to push his h-pawn, we will react accordingly. So for example, if black pushes the pawn one square, we will also push it one square. Because if we push it two squares, then he can play h5, and now it is white to move. So it's actually white in which is in a kind of a zugzwang. So we only push it one pawn, one step forward, and after h5, h4, it's important that it is black to move, and black is forced to play king to d6 and to surrender the f4 square, after which we will inevitably create a passed pawn, so something like this. And together with the active king, the f-pawn will march forward to victory for white. So this is why the move, after the move f5 check, black decided to play the move king e5 straight away, so trying to be kind of clever. But after white's next move, black actually resigned. I think perhaps there are more than one way to win this position. This is already a task for the scientific chess players of you. You can try to investigate it. I think the move pawn takes pawn is good enough. Black actually resigned here, but we can try to see what would happen if he would play on. So obviously he would take it. I would play h4. So I'm trying to create the passed pawn on this side of the board. And here comes an important point. So let's suppose black plays the move g5. Now this would be a mistake for me to take on g5, because then after pawn takes pawn, king e3, this position is probably a fortress because black can move his king backwards and I have no entry squares with my king. So this is probably a draw. But I don't play pawn takes pawn. I want to push my pawn on h5. Now I have a passed pawn. Black is in time actually to catch this passed pawn. But in this position, white has a key move which wins the game instantly. Can you find it? So this is a key move. This is e5. Now if the king takes on e5, then the king will be just not in time to catch the pawn. And if the pawn takes on e5, the white king gets a very strong square on e4, after which eventually he will give up his passed pawn, but the king will just come across to f6, will collect the g-pawn, and will win very comfortably. So black's resignation is understandable after in this position. So you see in this game, white in a way didn't do anything special. I just knew exactly what I want to achieve, what kind of endgame I want to achieve straight from the opening. Knowing some endgame, practical endgame knowledge helped me a lot here. I didn't even need to calculate all that much. I didn't need to make all that much effort. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. It also made my moves very natural and easy, and eventually the opponent lost the game, perhaps without making any clear mistakes or any very... He didn't do any blunders or any kind of obvious blunders. He still lost the game because he didn't knew his end games properly. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope also that you will watch my course for the Remote Chess Academy that I've done. The link will be probably below, so I invite you to watch this one, and I thank you for watching this video. See you next time. Bye bye.